conversations as well. So any type of interaction that we've had with someone that meant something to us, for good or bad. It could have been a conflict, it could have been a really great interaction, but a conversation that was poignant for us goes in long-term memory, and then other data that's significant to us. And so our brain actually reroutes the information that we take in based on whether or not it's just going to be stored in short term because we've processed it, or if it's significant enough to go into long-term memory. So responding then. So the process of collecting all the information is selecting, attending, understanding, and remembering. That was kind of ironic. So then you move to responding. So this is now when you are communicating back again. So those first four were part of your listening process. Now this is your response. It's the process of confirming your understanding. So you have to make sure that you're able to communicate back what you have taken in. And sometimes your understanding of what was communicated is incorrect. So this is that important feedback element that we've talked about before. Verbal responding is asking questions. So if you want to respond verbally to confirm your understanding, you ask clarifying questions. That's one option. Nonverbal responding is eye contact, or lack thereof sometimes. If you're not really listening, often you're looking at other things. Head nods, any type of nonverbal cue that communicates that you are trying to process and understand the message. So those are kind of the four elements of listening and then your response. But what are listening styles? We can learn the process of listening, but every person has a different listening style. So your personal listening style is your preferred way of making sense of spoken messages that you hear. 4 basic styles. We'll briefly go through each one. So people-oriented is one, action-oriented is another, content-oriented is another, and time-oriented is another. So just initially, I know you don't necessarily know the specific definition of these, but let's just say, looking at those 4, choose which one you think you are. People-oriented, action-oriented, content-oriented, or time-oriented. And you may end up deciding that you made an incorrect choice once you learn more about them, but see if you can identify which one you think you are based on your listening style. So people-oriented, we'll cover that first. People-oriented listening style individuals are comfortable and skilled at. That needs to be thrown in because you can be comfortable at listening and not be very good at it. So comfortable and skilled at listening to people's feelings and emotions. They focus on empathizing and searching for common areas of interest. So they want to meet the other person where they are. They want to communicate that they are trying to put themselves in that person's shoes, and they search for a common ground, things that they can relate to one another. And then people-oriented listening style individuals may be less apprehensive when interacting with others in small group and interpersonal situations, which of course, if you feel very comfortable and you're skilled and you are able to communicate well about people's feelings and emotions, there's probably not a big likelihood that you're going to be apprehensive when you're interacting in small groups, interpersonal. Remember, interpersonal, 2 people, dyad. So that tends to make sense. These tend to be very social people, people who have worked at their communication. And I would assume there are probably a few people that just naturally have this people-oriented listening style and they were born that way, but most people that fall into this category have actually done work to be able to communicate well and to listen well, because that is a skill. Okay, action-oriented listening style. These people prefer information that is well organized, brief, and error-free. So they tend to be pretty specific, they like things succinct, and they want it to be correct. So I kind of think of it as like, if you think action-oriented, that they want things to get done, and so that type of people would focus on the main point, the punchline. It's more of like the just get to the point, tell me what I need to know. You know, I don't need the whole flowery story. Just tell me the important things that I need to focus on. They tend to be more skeptical when listening. Sometimes they will be second guessers where they question the ideas and assumptions underlying a message. So if they're getting, you know, a very detailed story, they tend to process it and analyze it deeply. And they question what they're hearing and they assess whether the message is true or false. So action-oriented people, remember, they want things error-free. So they tend to be a little bit more critical of, okay, is this the truth? Can I really believe what I'm hearing? You know, I don't want to be fed a line of baloney, so let me hear specifically what I need to know, what is truthful, what is to the point. So action-oriented, very specific, very to the point, focus on what I need to know. Content-oriented listening style individuals are kind of the opposite of action-oriented. They're comfortable listening to complex, detailed information. So content-oriented people actually want to hear the whole long story. Don't leave any details out. Please share everything so that I have the full picture understanding. They focus on facts, details, and evidence. So the more the better. You know, I want every element of the whole entire picture so that I can wrap my brain around, you know, what all of this is about. And interestingly, they may reject messages without enough substance. So action-oriented says, like, you know, give me a bulleted list. You know, I don't want a paragraph, I want bullet points. And this one is like, no, you know, if I'm not getting enough information, I'm not going to pay attention to it. I want all of those specifics. And content-oriented individuals will also focus on issues, arguments, and the speaker's accuracy and credibility. Because remember, they're focusing on details. Everything is important. So if the speaker's accuracy is undermined, if the speaker's credibility is undermined, it's very difficult for content-oriented individuals to let that go because, you know, every small detail is significant to them and they focus on those things. So that can be a little bit of an issue when you're trying, you know, not to be so critical of the message and the speaker. And then finally, time-oriented listening style. This is probably the easiest to remember because it just makes sense. They want things really quick. So it's really action-oriented and time-oriented are similar, but action-oriented is more focused on the specifics. I'll actually go back so that you're not confused. Remember, these people want organized, brief, and error-free. So focus on the main point in the punchline. They want to know whether it's true. Then time-oriented, again, focus on the bottom line. I want the specifics, just get to the point. But it's more about the time issue than it is I want to get to the root of it. Notice the difference. So action-oriented people are almost like problem solvers. So you tell me what I need to know and I'm going to work on it. Time-oriented people, it's just, I don't want to deal with anything else, just give me the basics. So succinctly delivered messages, bulleted talking points, quick and brief, don't waste my time, just tell me what I need to know. Action-oriented, similar, but a little more into, you know, let's think about this, process this, is this true, can I believe this, those types of things. So time-oriented, probably the least effective listening style because you're really eliminating almost everything except save me from having to listen to you. So I hope that some of you are not saying, oh yes, I believe I'm time-oriented. If you are, this is a good lecture, you'll learn a lot. So what is your style? What listening skills do you use? So now that you've kind of looked through the listening styles and you can say, okay, I think I fit most with content-oriented or action-oriented. Okay, what listening skills do you use personally? And if you can identify more than one, what are some examples? What listening skills would you say you use consistently in your style? And if you would like to share that in the reflection, you may feel free to do so. And I would argue most of you use more than one. So share several of your listening skills, and hopefully, that can help other students as well if they're from a different style. You can kind of see the broader picture of listening as a whole. So here's food for thought as well, and this could be a little bit of a heated reflection, I suppose, but you can take any side, even if you are the opposite sex. Who is a better listener, men or women? So let's throw some heated discussion out there for the reflections, and you have to justify your answer. So who do you think is a better listener, men or women, and why? Listening barriers. So thinking of who's a better listener and why, whoever you say is the least effective listener, there are probably barriers as to why you feel that. So being self-absorbed is a very obvious one. We focus on our own needs rather than the needs of others. And remember, we've talked about other orientation. And so, huge listening barrier when you only focus on yourself. A self-absorbed listener is not focusing on the partner's message, but thinking what they will say next. And the interesting thing about the listening barrier of being self-absorbed, I would argue that most people who are self-absorbed listeners are not intentionally self-absorbed. I know there are a lot of people that, especially people who have been on debate teams, people who like to argue and have debates and, have that back and forth, and I'm not saying that arguments and debates are negative. I mean, they can be very, very positive things. So even that type of mentality of someone says something and it triggers your response in your head, and so you wait until they take a breath or pause just so you can get your next point out or your rebuttal out. So thinking of what they will say next, it's not necessarily I'm not going to listen to you and what you're saying because I'm more important, but sometimes it just triggers thought processes that mean that we're then thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to say this as a response, and then you're no longer listening to what they're continuing to say. A more selfish, I guess, I don't want to say self-absorbed because that's the definition, but a more selfish focus is when you're paying attention to your own agenda. So that truly is when you just have your own thing going and you just don't really have any interest in the other person. The remedy for being self-absorbed is recognizing it. Self-diagnosis. You know what? I do tend to do that. I'm that person that when someone says something to me, my thoughts get rolling and I get in my own little, thinking world, and I'm no longer able to listen because I'm already responding in my head. So it's really just a matter of reminding yourself to listen. Okay, I'm not going to think about my response yet. Let them finish what they're saying. Another one is criticizing the speaker. And that can be done in a lot of ways, but one of the probably more common ones is being distracted by what the speaker looks like. So it can be the way they're dressed, the way they speak, their mannerisms, anything like that, anything that's on their physical person that's distracting you, that you're critically analyzing. So, you don't like something about the way they look or the way that they act. That can be a listening barrier as well. Unchecked emotions are certainly listening barriers. And there's emotional noise. And this is a concept that we don't really ever talk about, but it's very important. We have emotional noise, and that happens when we have an emotional arousal that interferes with our effective listening. So that emotional arousal can come from lots of different ways. Certain words may be distractive. Sometimes concepts are distractive, and it doesn't even have to be words, just specific topics or ideas or concepts. And if it evokes an emotional reaction in us that we are then attending to our emotion, we no longer are able to effectively listen. And kind of the flip side of that, the emotional state of the speaker can also affect your ability to understand and evaluate what you hear. So sometimes the emotional state is not necessarily our own, but the emotional state of the speaker. If you think about a person that you remember speaking with who was really frantic